Everyone, welcome to today's afternoon session of MSP University. Get your PhD in pipeline. If you've attended a few sessions earlier, you know we're really excited about what's coming up here in just a few seconds. But real quick, our event and our program this week wouldn't be possible without our awesome sponsors. Stay tuned after KD and I wrap up. We're going to have Tanner Lacey, co-founder at Spiff, actually talking about the need for a technical sales team. But it is my great honor. I can't believe that we've never had KD on before. For those of you who haven't, don't follow KD, don't listen to the Live Better, Sell Better podcast, and have never heard of him, you are certainly in for a treat. Kevin is a LinkedIn top sales voice of 2020, an inside sales top 10 sales leaders, sales development executive of the year, SaaS sales consultant, certified badass, and somebody who's been a huge proponent of, and he's been living as a modern sales leader for so long and sharing his story. I am really, really excited to have this conversation with him today. Kevin, thank you so much for being here. I should say KD, sorry. So thank you so much for being here, man.
I'm excited, and anything that allows me to flash back to when I actually had good hair, and I guess muscles at that time. So that's always the throwback pick right there. I had good shape to it too, man. I was strong. I was good, bro. Good, bro.
You look like you're ready to score. You're probably a double a game. That's what you're looking like right there.
True story, my man. True story.
Love it. KD, man, we're glad to have you here. For our audience and for folks that are just joining us, today we're going to keep this super interactive. We're not going to bore you with a bunch of slides or anything like that. We're going to talk about really what's going on, what the future of sales looks like, what we can expect. We're going to talk a little bit about what's changed from the buyer's perspective and what we expect to change. And then if we have time, we're going to start to talk about what we think sales tech is going to look like in 2030. So KD, you ready? You want to jump into it?
Let's go, baby. I'm for it.
Let's do it. So first things first, right? For sales specifically, what do you think is going to change in the next 10 or 15 years? Like, how is it going to evolve from where we are today, and where do you think we're going?
Oh man, I don't know if we have enough time for the next 10, 15 years, all the changes that I think are going to go down. But I think about a few things in terms of what will change. And, I think about one, what sellers have to be good at. And what sellers have to be good at now compared to what I think they're going to have to be good at in the future is kind of the shift that sales has been going through really for the past few decades, right? If you think about sales used to be needed for the what. That was the only place you learned about what was out there. The salesperson had to bring it to you, right? So the what was where we really got into this world of selling. Then we got to the why, right? So we moved from the what. Hold on, now my dog's losing his mind. 1 second. Right as I'm getting into the good stuff, I might have to. For a second. So we talked about the what was out there, but then it shifted to the why. Salespeople were there to explain, well, why you needed this. Why did you need this? The shift that I think comes next for everybody is salespeople have to be experts in the how. How the product needs to be used and how it will impact the user, right? Unfortunately, for the most part, the majority of sales reps don't actually use the product they sell,
right? Which
has prevented them from being how experts. And so that's what I think comes next is we have to get experts at the how to use it, how to implement it, and then how they'll actually see the results from it.
That's interesting. So if we think about the implication there, does that mean the profile of who ends up in sales is a little bit different now, maybe than what it would be, 10 or 15 years ago?
Absolutely. I definitely think so. And also too, let's be honest, I think we've had the profile of a great salesperson wrong for a long time.
Yeah, sure.
If you ask the majority of people what they think makes a great salesperson, right? Energetic, enthusiastic, extrovert.
They've got people skills, KD, people skills. Right. They like talking to people.
Like to win, competitive. Go ask any real sales leader if those are actually the characteristics of their top reps. And it's not, but go even further. Go ask a buyer who they like to engage with. And I promise you, those are not the characteristics, right? And so what we're going to need salespeople to truly get better at is how to actually connect the dots. How do you connect the dots on the how to the use case of the prospect you're talking to? Problem solving, actually understanding the day in and day out of the people they're selling to, right? Like, to me, that's the shift. And that actually requires a better listener, more attention to detail. I do think salespeople are going to have to start getting more technical, but not so they can get into the technicalities of the product, so they can get into technicalities of the use cases of the product. Right. And we're already starting to see that a little bit with SE orgs starting to grow and sales engineers getting in, and it's starting to expand. So I think the profile does change over time.
I think it's an interesting point too. And we're going to be talking a lot about this later with Tanner about the rise of sales engineering, but I want to stay on this point here. So does that then lead to a world where you've got sales folks that are maybe specialized by vertical or by use case? Like, I know, the data story really well for marketers, and that's kind of the space that I stay in. Or how do you see that kind of evolving?
So yeah, I think you nailed it a little bit there. The use case. Yeah. Is this person an expert in the how it impacts that type of persona? Right now, we give the majority of personas all to the same rep and say, hey, go sell our product to all of these personas. And then we wonder why a lot of the demos stay high level and they stay at these just like what levels, because we're trying to pitch everyone the same versus this is the specific use case of our product for this persona. You need to master how they use the product, right? I get pitched all the time, right? I'm a VP of sales at a software startup. I can tell the majority of these reps have no idea how I'd actually use the product. No idea. And I do think that changes. It has to. It absolutely has to.
Well, it's funny. We were actually talking about our session earlier today was on personalization and like general manager. Cool. I get pitched for recycling services for restaurants because, that's what a general manager of a restaurant is into, which I get a kick out of it. Yep. But I want to double click into this a little bit more. So if our sellers are moving down maybe a better persona understanding, a little bit more technical, where are bullpens going to change or sales floors going to change? Are they going to be co-located still? Or are we going to put in market where they belong?
So I think, again, if we think about what the buyer is going to want, and we'll talk more about it, it depends on what the buyer wants. I think the most efficient and effective model is a blended, call it 80-20 inside to field. I mean, the majority of what you are doing is inside. So call it, the bullpen or the floor or remote working. You're on the beach in Costa Rica. It doesn't really matter. But then there's going to be those times. And this is the shift. Why were salespeople going in person before? To try to sell.
Yeah.
What do I think the shift is? I think the shift are salespeople go in person to help implement, to help use, right? So I can sit over your shoulder and say, wait, hold up. No. Click here to here, and you're going to get what we need. So I think it's a blended use case of mostly inside because that's what most of the buyers want. But then secondary, because also too, by the way, the entire world became dispersed during all this, right? And as much as people are like, oh, we can't wait to get back into the field, I think we've forgotten that maybe our own buyers aren't where they used to be anymore. There may not be that many places you can fly in to get in front of the room of people. So I think the blended model is you fly in to help them implement, to help them use, right? They did a free trial and you say, hey, do you want help getting this set up for your whole team? That is the trigger that I think starts to move things along.
There's a lot there. We're going to talk a little bit more about buyers in a bit. And I want to just let our audience know we've had a bunch of people join. Just drop your questions in the Q&A panel. We'll start to work through those as they come up. One of the things that changes in that world, right, as a recovering sales engineering leader, how does compensation change for salespeople? Salespeople are coin op, it's a 50-50 split, whatever it is. How do you see that evolving as that seller becomes more persona specialized or how specialized?
So I've talked about this publicly and I know it riles people up and whatever, like, I don't care anymore. Like, I fear very little in this life, but I think more and more you see less and less commission-based payouts, or the commissions are paid out on speed of implementation and usage, right? So it's no longer about selling the deal that made you a great salesperson, right? Like, especially like on an inbound free trial, they saw all the reviews on G2, they've consumed 4 of your webinars and content, and then they signed up. Paying that rep to close the deal is not where I think the real skill set lies. The deal is in, did you get them set up on the product where they never wanted to give it back, right? Because we forget about this. I actually talked about this with Jeremy a few years ago on the podcast. This idea of coin operating. The idea of coin operating. I think most people forget how a coin operated machine works. If I walk up to a gumball machine, that is coin operated, by the way, do I get the gumball and then put in the coin, or do I have to put in the coin to get the gumball? Which one is it?
This is a trick question, but I think you got to put in the coin to get the gumball.
Right. It's not a trick question. That's how a coin operated machine works. You put the coin in first. Right. Is that how we pay our salespeople? No, it's the opposite. The company asks for the gumball first and then pays, right? And then taking it one step further to a buyer. And we've seen this in B2C. We've seen this in B2C, and eventually it's going to catch up to B2B. First of all, how do most people feel with dealing with a salesperson? Not something they generally look forward to. But you know what a competitive differentiator is for some companies in B2C? Our salespeople are non-commissioned. And that's a competitive point to be able to say that, because what does it build in the buyer? More trust. Right. And we're moving into that trust zone now. The what is handled, the why is handled. It's that trust. Who is a buyer more likely to trust? I go in and you know I'm 50-50, or you go in is like, yo, he doesn't make any more or less money if we sign up regardless. I think compensation does change.
That's interesting. So do you know of any orgs out there, any companies out there that you can publicly mention that are moving, maybe not completely off of 50-50, but largely away from it?
So yes is the answer. I'm blanking on the companies, and I will follow up, because I went through this a couple of years ago where I really was talking to people about how they were doing it. There's a really good book that talks about this. It's called The Machine. That's the gentleman that wrote it. First name's Justin. I can't remember his last name right now. But yes, there are companies that are doing this. There's one that's just blanking right now. I talked to them about it, but I do believe you're going to see it more and more, because also, too, there's this weird idea that salespeople are that different. We're not that different than other people, right? Like, why isn't an engineer paid 50-50? Right? Like, why isn't HR paid 50-50 off net promoter score? Why isn't CS paid 50-50 off churn? Why isn't marketing paid 50-50 off, but sales is. So yeah, I think, and we're starting to see this, we're starting to see this shift. And my dream, man, I want to have 3 comp plans for my sales team. I want to have 3 comp plans. Commission only, 50-50, 100% base. That allows you as an individual to pick what resonates with you. Because again, we're not all the same. Some people crave security more than upside. Well, sure, on the commission only plan, I can make 300K. But shoot, I got 2 kids. I'm the sole income from my family. That upside isn't as important as knowing I'm going to make 200K every year if I do my job. So I do, man. And there are companies out there that are starting to make this shift, and I think it becomes the norm.
It's interesting, right? Because if you pull the deployment scenario through, companies not actually going to get a chance for you to renew until you're using and taking advantage of the product, right? So I like this thinking, and there's actually a question in here, and folks, this is interactive. We've got KD till the top of the hour. Drop any questions you have on there. We're going to cover a bunch, but feel free to throw anything that you got. KD, this question from Victor. Pay on usage, pay on lifetime usage, pay on when it's deployed, like in this new world, how do you think about that?
So I think, it kind of depends on the role in the product, but I think about implementation usage on the sales rep side, unless the rep is also allowed to own that account in perpetuity. I think it stops where they are in control, right? So, and that's where if it's being handed off to CS, well, the lifetime usage is no longer that much in control of the salesperson versus how well they got started, right? And so that's how I think about usage. and I used to have a comp plan where the reps were comped on MRR, right? So on their recurring MRR, they're recurring. And the comp plan, quota attainment determined the percentage of your MRR that you got. So now, first of all, short term, you're not making a ton of money. Right. So it gets you thinking long term. Secondarily, you are now vested in churn. Because if you're bringing in bad customers that keep leaving, your MRR hits a ceiling. I can literally tell you what your cap is. But then the third part of it is it almost becomes a second base. You know that money is coming in, right? And guess what? My top performers, once they had, tons of revenue under them, do you think they slacked? Do you think they cut corners because they weren't losing? No, they were still cruising and producing. And it almost becomes the opposite. Now we are coin operated. I'm paying you to do the thing that you're supposed to do. So that's how I look at it.
How do you set up because I can envision a world where that goes really, really well. I can envision a world where it's well-intentioned, but you've got your AE hanging over your CS team like, ooh, don't do that. Don't do that, Katie. Oh no, you're going to cost me. How do you set up the alignment there in that world? Right. And I wanted to be clear, the alignment between sales and post-sales in a world where your sellers are getting a percentage of the recurring revenue.
And so this is something that actually Jocko Vanderkooj and I have spoken about, winning by design, right? This idea of revenue pods. SDR, AE, CS, and engineering within a pod for revenue. And there's compensation across where everyone is incentivized at different levels, but incentivized for the key metric, which is recurring revenue or new logos or expansion revenue, right? And so it's making sure that people are aligned on it. This probably isn't the topic for today, but I think in a lot of ways, especially in the SaaS space, we have over specialized. We've got MDRs to handle inbound leads. We have SDRs to handle outbound leads. We've got BDRs to handle partnership leads. We've got AEs that now no longer know how to prospect because that's being done by somebody else. And they're specialized by SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. So they only know how to sell to those things. And then we've got CS. So I can now have a closer who hands off to CS. So now I'm no longer tied to a customer. So you have AEs that don't know what great customers are like. And then you have CS handling churn and requests, but they don't know how to sell as well because we're over specializing. We need to bring it back, I think, quite a bit, but then align around what's the most important metric to that company. And that is what everyone works around.
I love it. And don't forget account management too, because your CS team is going to focus on use cases, but AM is going to come for commercials, but that's different than sales because it's more project oriented. It's an interesting, great hot take there. Folks, keep the questions coming. I'm going to tee Katie up for a couple right now, but please do use the Q&A panel, drop those in here. Question, this came actually in the chat panel, Katie. Aaron wants to chat a little bit more about that kind of 3 comp plan model that you thought about. Now, I know you haven't rolled that out, but in your future world order, when we're running these 3 comp plans, how would you expect performance to be across each one?
Because it's tailored to the person, I'd expect performance to go up, right? So I'll break these. By the way, I got to test this one time already. So I had talk about over specialization. I had an LDR team, right? LDR team.
What's an LDR?
Lead development rep. So basically, like to find qualified accounts. So at ServiceTitan, we had some really strict qualifications, and my SDRs spent a lot of time wasted DQing leads. Right. So I was like, eventually I need to build a small squad just going out and finding the qualified accounts that they could work. Right. So I had an LDR team, and guess what? They had no commission. Paid them their OTE. And guess what they showed up and did every day? Their job.
Yeah.
Right. The top performers were the top performers. The middle of the pack was still the middle of the pack. Right. And those things were there. So like what I think about is, okay, you've got security people. If you crave security and you're in a 50-50 job, how does that affect you emotionally? You're almost always in a state of anxiety and fear. If you're in a state of anxiety and fear, you're not going to sell well. Okay, So I believe that person's performance goes up because they feel secure in their job. The 50-50 person is generally going to be semi-motivated by upside, right? And they know that about themselves. So they are chasing the multiples, right? And they don't feel capped, right? They don't feel capped in their earnings. And then you've got the commission only. Those are, generally speaking, those are like your top. They don't think about a base. They don't think about quota. They're sitting there thinking about how do I 2-3x something, and they don't like the fact that they can 2x people and only make 2x more. Right. If I'm 2xing you, I believe I should be making 3x more, 4x more because I took that risk on. And so I think it varies by the person, but I think more and more people, especially as the sellers demographic change a little bit, security is more of a crave than the high-end top side. Let's also just be honest. If we're hot taking y'all, okay, we're in this career where, you know, multiple six figures are promised as OTE. What percentage of people are hitting that? Yeah. Right. And eventually we wise up and go, you know what, how about you just pay me $100,000 a year to do my job? Like, how about we stop promising 235K and just say, yo, here's $100,000, do your job, and go from there.
I think it's such a great perspective. And whenever we talk about, especially designing comp plans, right? We often talk about it from the AE perspective, but you think as a sales manager, if the team number is hit, your job's not done. You should get to the team number by having everybody at 70%, 60%, whatever it is, not because one person did heroic acts and is at 400 and you've got the rest of the team looking at their socks like, and there's no way I'm going to be successful here. It's sink or swim.
Yeah, and that's the difference between like superstar cultures and system cultures, right? If you've got one or two reps that are carrying 80% of your number, you can't scale because that doesn't scale. And that's where you see a lot of people hit that ceiling. Either only the founder could do it, but no one after him could. You get a small team, you get that one person that could. You're like, oh yeah, and then you don't. That one person's making up 70% of your revenue. That doesn't scale. You can't keep finding people that do that. So you hit this ceiling over and over again because you don't have the systems in place to make it repeatable. And so I do think as we look at how things change, comp plans also too, for the most part, always think company first and then individual. I think that starts to shift slightly of like, okay, what's good for the company and the individual, right? And maybe it's not this huge high upside, but it's a good living wage that people feel like they can go and do their job and not think about what they're going to make.
No, that's great. And I'd love the perspective on how sales management changes in this future, right? I feel like, and we were chatting about this even before, like I learned sales from guys and gals who sold on-premise software with enterprise licenses, 3-year, Microsoft on-premise stuff. So probably the world was going to evolve again, but how does sales management kind of change in the new world?
So very almost similarly, right? If you talk about making sure, one, that they're much better coaches, right? Like they need to be much better process and system design thinkers, right? You manage a process, you develop people. That's the shift. Management, where you really think where management came from the floor on the factory, right? But at that point, you were managing a process, right? Are they putting the screws on the right way, right? Versus now that we are in a knowledge space, in a problem solving space, it's hard to manage problem solving. It's hard to manage people in a multifaceted decision-making process. There's so many nuances to it. Whereas if you are a great system and design thinker, combined with a good coach, enabling your reps to get better, that's where I think it starts to shift. A lot of management's always been focused on, are people doing? I think the shift on management moving forward is like, are they doing well? Are they improving on their job? Do they understand that buyer the right way? And is the revenue coming from where it needs to? So I think that's a big part of it too with management is most managers have to be much better coaches and much better like problem solvers that they can roll systems and processes out around.
Well, I think it's something, and you probably know this in the back of our heads, right? The AE who was the top AE that gets promoted to manager is usually not as successful as somebody who's a good coach, who's a good listener, who can really handle a lot of that that Katie just mentioned.
Well, and to that point, though, real quick, management can't change if executive leadership doesn't change. Because right now there is a massive hole in terms of management development. Okay, like massive hole. That same AE that got promoted, how much management training do they go through?
Oh yeah.
How much psychology training do they go through? How much training they do on issue diagnosis and problem solving? How much behavioral modification change do they go? They don't get anything.
Yeah.
Right? Or they sit through a 3-hour session on having tough conversations. And then we wonder why it doesn't work out. Right. So we have to teach them how to do things the right way.
It's something that we talk about too when this comes up a lot with hiring. And you think about, what's a manager's most important job? Are they going to hire well? How many people, and I mean, I wish we could do a show of hands of folks on the call that are in hiring that have never had formal training on interviewing, writing a job description, how to build a hiring process. And yet it's just, yeah, well, Katie, you're the sales manager, like go hire some, quota crushers or whatever you're supposed to do. Leave me alone.
Nothing. And here's the bigger part. Even for the ones like, oh, I've been taught how often was it reviewed? How often was it measured? Yeah. How were the scorecards put together? Has it evolved, or are you using the same process you were 10 years ago? Yep. Right? I literally just sat down with my SDR managers last week. It's like, we need to go back to our interview scorecards. And we need to review the questions that we are asking and break down why we ask them, what it means, right? And what we're looking for in these questions, because we're missing the mark in certain places, right? But you have to teach people how to do this. And I think we just drastically underestimate how long it takes to get good at something. It takes to get good at something. We don't invest in our managers nearly enough.
Well, and you do see this at high growth SaaS companies. You get this cream of the crop, right? We just hired the right managers or directors and they solved, and then you just see there's this cap where they don't go any higher, right? And then you start to churn through middle management because you hired a few superstars, got maybe lucky or good, and didn't scale that back to the systems and the people management part. There's no system to create the next generation of managers, team leads, directors, VPs, SVPs, whatever it might be.
No, I agree.
Lots of good questions coming in. One, this is actually a good one for your perspective, Katie. How has sales management, how has that shifted, in the face of COVID, especially in the B2B world? And then how long do you think some of those changes are going to stick around?
So a few of the ways that it's shifted, I think, over COVID, right, is it's harder. I'm just going to start with that. It is harder. And one of the things that I really don't like about the industry really over the past year and a half is everyone keeps talking about we're selling remote, right? Remote work's here to stay. Selling remote. We're not selling remote. We are selling in a pandemic on lockdown. There's a big difference. If my team was still able to go see each other after work, that's a different thing. If my team could go grab lunch together still, that's a different thing than just selling remote. We're selling from the corners of our bedroom, right? We're selling from places that we weren't meant to sell from. And so I think there should have been, and we've worked a lot on it, of like, you got to really focus on the person in salesperson. And if you're not attuned to that, those are the managers and the teams that have struggled the most, is if you don't know how to connect with your people, if you weren't connecting to them when you were in the same room, now that you're not, that's a big shift, right? And I do think as well, you have to be a much better listener now. Your attention to detail needs to be much higher. Because when you were in the office, if someone walked in and they had bags under their eyes, they were moving slow, you could tell. Now, right, we're in a Zoom call. I'm sitting here like with my arms crossed, my hood up. I might even have my camera on. You have no idea how people are doing, right? And so that real close attention to detail is important, and blocking time for just the person conversations. We like the amount of interactions we used to have in the office. I think we forget like how many just conversations occurred ad hoc that no longer happen anymore. So I think a big focus is to shift there to the person, and also being cognizant. This is also too big point to one of the other points is if you're process based, you know whether or not COVID is having an impact. If you are superstar based, you don't necessarily know what's going wrong. If your team is doing the same things now that they were doing before and the results changed, then you can point at something. But if everyone was doing something differently before, now you don't know what's actually broken. So I think there needs to be a shift towards process management, kind of like I was saying before.
Yeah, no, it's there's a whole hell of a lot there. There's a bunch more questions coming in. I feel like we just have to schedule an encore for this. Get Netflix to give us a 4-show series run.
I'm ready.
So when we talk about this, we're talking about this impending shift that's coming. We're thinking about it. This is kind of a long-term view on things. Organizationally, who is it on to see this shift coming and start to get the changes in place today to make sure that organizations are set up for success?
So personally, I feel like that is my responsibility as the leader. But I enable my team to be constantly looking for these things to communicate, right? So I take that on personally, of like taking that time to sit and think like, what is happening? Where are things going? What are the patterns? What's different now? I do view that as part of my responsibility to then enable my team on like, are you seeing this too? What are we noticing? How is this feeling, right? And so I think it's on the leader at the top to create the environment where everyone is looking for it. But at the end of the day, I do think that's on me, right? To ask the right questions and enable my team and also hear from them, right? So from my managers and my reps, I tell them this often. I love the if I just statements. If I just had, if I just could, if we just did, if we just found, if we just, I tell them like, don't let that thought go. Grab it. Send it to me. If you just what? If you just had what? You think your results would improve, right? And so it's on everyone to grab those ideas and to share them. But I do think it's my responsibility to be forward looking and help that go down through the team.
Yeah, no, there's a whole hell of a lot there. I want to shift a little bit. We've been talking about sales from our perspective. Let's talk about the buyer and let's talk about what's going on in their worlds, because I'm sure nothing has changed for them at all. They're buying exactly the same way they were at the start of the pandemic.
Yeah.
One part I wanted to start with, because I think it's I don't want to say it's a hot button topic, but it's a little bit tough for some sales people and sales leaders to get comfortable with product-led growth. What the hell does that actually mean, Katie, from your perspective?
From my perspective, product-led growth means that the product tends to be the first engagement they have with your company, not the salesperson. And that the buyer is getting into the how much earlier. They're getting to use the product, and then that's what spurs growth. So that's what product-led growth is to me. And there's ways to do it, right? Free trials, freemiums, on-site, those types of things. But basically, the buyer is getting to experience the product on their own or with assistance before paying.
And that it feels like there's some salespeople and sales leaders that are really uncomfortable with that concept. Why the hell do you think that is, Katie?
Oh man, because it's different. It's different.
No, don't change.
They couldn't possibly understand the product without us. That's why we're here. We're the product experts. Like, they couldn't possibly understand it. Our product's way too technical. Our buyers would never understand it. That's why. And this is where we don't get the choice. We don't get to make this choice, right? You go ahead and ask damn near every buyer out there and say, which would you prefer, to get to the experience the product before buying or not? What are they going to say?
Yeah, they always want to try before they buy.
Always do. Always do. But we've always gated it. We've always put it behind, which is actually really like, God bless us as salespeople. If you think about how well we've actually done this, like, hey, sign this $1 million contract for the thing that you've never actually used with results that you don't know that you're actually going to get. Like, props to all of us, y'all, for making that happen. But the buyer eventually goes, I don't know that I want to do that anymore, right? I'm going to talk to people that have used the product. I don't even want to talk to you anymore. right? So I think that's why people are afraid of it, is because it removes us as it stands now. But we are a huge part of product-led growth. Sales is absolutely imperative for it. It just has to be done the right way.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. And I think about, you mentioned before, like the trends in B2C kind of coming into our B2B world. Like, I don't know, people are buying cars online now. Just reflect on that for a second. Like a car is like a pretty big capital investment for most mortals in the world. That's huge, dropping 30 or 40 grand on something you've never even test drove. Well, why? Because used car salesmen and car salesmen in general are, it's easy. We have that general ickiness reaction to it. Does that sort of B2C behavior also influence some of what's going on for your B2B buyers?
No, for sure. Like, because also too, we talk about this. You and I riffed on this before. Like, you said it's a B2B what? A B2B buyer, aka a person, aka that person is a consumer. That same consumer that is now comfortable buying a mattress, a car, a house online is the same consumer that's looking at your product for their team, right? But even a car, I get to test drive. Even a car, if I go on Carvana right now or whatever it is and buy it and I don't like it in the first 3 days, what can I do?
Send it back.
Send it back. And I don't even need to talk to anybody. I can just send a text message that says, I'd like to return. Someone shows up and gets it from me, right? And so, yes, I think this bleeds over for sure. There's more tools enabling it, right? Like there's more ways to know if a product is good or not. But I think, and this is back to what we were talking about before, why I think sales has to get very use case. I also think like a lot of people are talking about a consolidation of tools. I actually think there's going to be a little bit of a splintering because the use cases are going to get so niche.
Yeah.
You have a lot of tools that are trying to do everything for everybody. I think you're going to start seeing a lot more smaller companies doing what they do really well for a very specific group of people.
Well, you've definitely seen that in, like, I think media is a great example of that. Back to our consumer worlds, it's like you can, you're into rugby, man, there's apps for that. There's social networks for that. There's all these different sort of niche communities and media centers. It's the same thing. It makes sense, right? Like, hey, cool, you're selling in a highly regulated environment to personal wealth managers for high net worth individuals. The needs that they have are very bespoke relative to maybe just like your regular investment banker. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think the other part too, I want to go back to something you said before about there's kind of more information available, right? I can go on Glassdoor and learn a lot about your company. I can go on G2 Crowd, right? How does that impact where we're at today, both from a buyer and from a seller perspective? It's just there's information everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, right? Because if you think about like the buying process of old, right? You get to the end of the buying cycle and what do a lot of buyers ask for? Could you put me in touch with a couple references, please? And the salesperson goes, of course I will. And then they go cherry pick 2 references to put them in touch. You have the calls, and then the buyer doesn't feel any better afterwards because those were cherry picked references. Versus I can go on G2 and I can go read unbiased and unfiltered reviews about the product, right? So now I'm coming with you, like this is what's a big shift, right? It's like people are going in and they're asking questions about objections that the salesperson wasn't ready for because they went and read reviews and they read someone said, oh yeah, like that blue button never works and it drives me nuts. And then now the buyer is talking to the rep, well, talking about this blue button I'm hearing about, right? So it can plant seeds of doubt in someone's mind too. And most companies, I don't think nearly amplify their base enough to help with this. So reviews are huge, right? Just wait until we have true like YouTube type influencers demoing products just like they do with unboxing. I see that coming for sure, right? Me just as a software user, like I'm just signing up for everybody's free trials and I'm walking everybody through how it works and people are watching me use the product and give my feedback on it. I bet that happens.
Yeah, no, it's so wild to think about how, transparency selling. I think Todd Capone is the author of that. one of the things that he says in that book, and it's kind of still mind-blowing for me, that the best reviewed software is actually the most inspected. But if your software on G2 is 4.2 to, I think it was a 4.6, that gives the consumer, the buyer, comfort. They're like, okay, cool, it's not perfect.
Right.
And I know there's some warts, and I kind of know where those warts are, where if it's too good, they kind of look for problems with it. So it's just this interesting evolution of what could be a scary thing. It's like, no, it is the blue button. You know what, KD, the blue button never worked. It's not going to work. It's a feature we rolled out and we've deprecated it because it didn't add any value. Boom, done. Confidence relationship built.
Done. Know your reviews, salespeople. Know your reviews. Don't get excited, because also you could reference them.
Yeah.
You could reference them, right? Like, talk about Shane. I believe, like, and I've talked about this. I talked about this with Chris Walker, and this is another hot take that, I'm not sure a lot of people are ready for. I believe customer-led selling is going to become a thing. And where customers are truly incentivized to help sell the product, right? Not at the end of the sales cycle where it's like whatever else, but like, no, like I've got 20 doctors on payroll, hopping on 2 demos a week, every single week, right? And people are like, oh, no, that causes a conflict of interest. There is no greater conflict of interest than a commissioned salesperson. There's not. Whereas a paid customer running demos, their reputation's on the line. Because if they are recommending a product to their fellow peers and it is not legit, their reputation is on the line. It's actually the most pure form of influencer type marketing and selling. Customers selling is where I think we end up getting to, and the salesperson's just kind of there like, hey guys.
I'll take the order and grab the coffees for you. Let me know what you need.
Because back to my earlier point, no one can speak to the how better than a customer.
Yeah,
that's what's next.
I want to double click into that. We got a bunch of questions waiting in the queue. Yeah. Keep the questions coming. I do want to get KD. We talked about this when we were prepping, right? What you're talking about is sort of this elevated form of the flywheel, right? Not just the funnel, but the flywheel. How close do you think we are to that, where we've got, not just advocates singing our praises, but like you're on the payroll, man. You've done well for us. You're using the product the right way. Like, how close do you think we are to that?
I don't think we're very close yet. My guess is some companies start to do this within the next 2 to 3 years. Like, trust me when I say I'm going to be one of them, right? Like, these conversations are happening for the companies that are looking forward and going, okay, like this, this would be better. So I think it starts. But then what also tends to happen in B2B a lot, once one thing starts to work a little bit, what do people do?
Yeah, copy it.
Everyone tries to do it, but they do it haphazardly and then it doesn't work, right? But I think this happens within the next 5 years. It starts to build momentum. Within 10 years, if you don't have customers on your demos, you can't sell.
It's interesting, man. That's a hell of a hot take. All right, let's I love it. Let's do some questions here. So question for KD. So this is coming from somebody who's a founder, early stage company, just building out their sales team. What's the first place that they should invest in?
The first place you should invest in, if you're just building out, is a good recording software to record yourself do everything. Record every demo you take. Record yourself writing a follow-up email and explaining why you're writing it the way that you are. Record yourself leading a training. Record yourself scrubbing leads. Record everything that you're doing as a founder, but think about it as if someone's sitting over your shoulder. Like, you're writing that follow-up email. Here's why I'm writing it the way that I am. Do a demo or two and then do a call review of your own demo and explain why you're doing the things that you are doing. Because what this will do is when you start to hire in, you've actually already built your playbook in a way, right? And you're not having to take the extra time to do it. Imagine how much better a new sales rep would be at a startup if walking in, they could listen to 30 of the founders' demos, right? So that's the first place I'd invest, is record everything that you're doing, what works and what doesn't. And the second would be customer interviews. And I think this actually covers another question that someone asked here, is if you have customers right now, You need to go interview every single one of them and ask them why they bought, what problem they were trying to solve, what were they afraid of before buying, what's their favorite part about the product, what's changed the most since using the product, and how would they describe what you do to another peer. If you go get those 6 questions answered across 10, 15, 20 customers, well, now you got your value prop. Now you've got your unspoken objections. Now you've got your case studies. Now you got your headlines and your subject lines for your emails, and you have the gap questions to build into your scripting. So those are the 2 core places. And I think someone asked how to rally around speaking the language of the customer. Is that Cheryl? What up, Cheryl? See you. Bus check in the house. Let's go. Enable your team to go talk to the customers, but ask those 6 questions. The bigger the company, the better. The more you can narrow it down, the better. But those 6 questions across the teams, that's how you go do it.
Yeah, phenomenal answer there. And that's something where, back to the question about COVID before, the organizations that figured that out and are doing that are the ones that have been largely successful in COVID. We've heard that time and time again at MSP events, where like, if you've got really frothy customers and you can use their language, you're not going to have as much of a problem prospecting, closing deals, and all of that. And I think, Katie, to that point, it just gets more and more important to have that there.
Yeah.
So I want to dive into tech for the last couple minutes that we have here. What do you think the sales? So right now, sales stack, 17-ish tools, give or take, depending on how you count. What do you think the sales tech stack looks like in 2030, 2035?
So I think it's smaller, because people are eventually going to have to admit that it's not working. And these are the things where sometimes we just don't like to admit it as salespeople, but have sales results gone up since all these tools have come out? Like significantly so? Are more people hitting quota now than they were 5 years ago? Tough one, y'all. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's not. And so I do think you start to see a consolidation. There's foundational things that every org needs. You need a data tool, you need a sales process tool, but a sales process tool, I think, changes. I'll just dive into this one. If you think about the sales process tools, the grooves, the outreaches, the sales lofts, right, where it's building out your cadences and sequences. Right now, they're very dry and non-dynamic. Day 1, call 1. Day 3, email 1. Day 5, LinkedIn connection. It's static. I believe they start to shift into more dynamic. And then the next move is more dynamic based off customer product usage. Okay, day 1, if customer has not logged in, here's your step. If customer has logged in but not taken first onboarding step, here's your step. If customer has logged in, taken first step but got stuck, here, that's what I think it turns into in terms of a sales process tool. You need a coaching tool, right? Something to be able to listen in to the calls and coach reps and measure whether or not they're getting better. I do think hopefully these tools evolve to a point where they can actually tell you what's working. Like, we analyzed all 1,000 calls to the VP of sales persona in finance industry. These phrases, these value props, and these questions are what lead to the highest close rates, right? So it's about the elimination. It's not about adding more. It's about eliminating the things that don't matter, right? So I think that's there. Then you need a calendaring tool, for time management, because most reps can't manage time for anything. So that's a whole nother thing too. So I think it consolidates a bit, but I would not be surprised if things niche down there too, of for sales teams selling to marketing leaders, this is the best tool for you, right? And being able to narrow down to those sorts of things. So I think that's where tech starts to go a little bit over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, and it's funny too. We talk about this, and we're starting to see this a little bit in B2C today, right? Where my experience interacting with a brand is different depending on what I've done or haven't done. It's not like this is new, but it's just new for us. And I think the part too, KD, the getting the product in the usage data, I think that that's a big hurdle for us to cross, because most organizations today that lives, I don't know, that the engineers are doing something with it, something.
Right. That product usage and how, like, this word, it drives my team nuts. Probably going to drive people nuts that are listening today. How are people actually using your product? Not how often, right? So a lot of product orgs and like, I'm not trying to call people out here, but it's like, our product utilization is great. Okay, time out. They logged in. That does not mean that your utilization is great. Okay, there's a difference. How are they using it? Where do they go? What is their workflow? When's the last time you watched a customer use your product? When's the last time you watched 100 customers use your product? Right? So you got all these tools for website tracking. Guess what a lot of people don't have? Product tracking. What is that actual flow? Where do they click and they don't get what they want? Where do people get stuck in onboarding? So I think that's going to be where you're going to see more tools come up, is like, how do people use the product? And then how does that influence language? And how does that influence sales? And how does that influence onboarding?
No, there's a lot there. Once you start to get that into the product usage data into the sales systems, and even take it one level further. I mean, Katie, there could be a future where, keyword choices that we're doing in SEO are changing because VPs of sales in Austin are, they're popping off right now. It's just, they're using the product in a real special way. We got to get more of them in the top of the funnel. And oh yeah, the conversation intelligence tool identified that this is probably the best talk track. Mm-hmm. Because we know downstream, this is what's happening. I think that that's a very, it's a little creepy, but I think it's actually going to make a much better experience for the buyer, because it's closer to it's like the true vision of personalization. So
let's talk creepy real quick here. Who here has ever like said something out loud and then get targeted with a Facebook ad? Anybody? Okay, it's creepy as hell. But like, do we actually mind it that much? Because we were kind of like, well, I was talking about Nike shoes, and I kind of am curious what's out. Like, we actually don't, like, we'll all say it's creepy.
Yeah.
But we actually don't mind things being suggested to us based off of our behavior,
if it's valuable. And I think that's back to what you were saying before with the role of the seller evolving. Like, I like getting retargeted. I bought a cooler. I mean, I'm not a freaking cooler collector. You know what I mean? So but I think it's back to it's that relevance and that understanding of how, but I agree with that. So we've got a couple more questions in here. Let's get through maybe one or two more here. And then Katie, I'll give you a couple seconds just to wrap with this. So Patrick's got a question here about STR intern. So not only do we have SDRs, MDRs, BDRs, ADRs, SDR intern to help prospect into and help with the SDR, kind of identify the right contacts. Have you seen anything like this before? Has anything like this ever come across your purview?
Yeah, so that was my LDR team. That's what I was talking about, right? But here's the important part. You got to raise quotas because of it, right? If you are giving your seller more time to go prospect, the activity expectation should come up, and the pipeline expectations should come up, because you just removed part of their job that they were having to spend time on anyway. So that was the trade-off, is like, when I brought in LDRs, the trade-off was, okay, but SDR, now because you're not scrubbing and you're not researching, you are literally just executing against these qualified accounts. Your quota has to come up, the quality of your calls have to come up, and your activity has to come up, because we just took 3 to 4 hours off of your day and put it on somebody else. So it's really important that those things are aligned, because otherwise what happens, right, is you take that kind of grunt work away. They don't actually fill it with now the more productive time. It just kind of disappeared, and you never know like what happened there. So it can be valuable and important to do, but it's something where there has to be a trade-off somewhere. You can't just add it in and keep numbers the same. Also, just from a cost perspective, right? But be very careful. Just the word triggers me a little bit. Intern. If these individuals are having conversations with people at these accounts, they need to be well trained. They need to be well coached, because that's also, by the way, a shift. Okay. One bad email can get your domain blocked from an account. Right? That could be a one click, and you can no longer reach out to the account from the domain. Right? You've got one person on the phone calling into that account doing a poor job. That account can block you, right? They're like, dude, we're just not going to do business with you anymore, right? So just be careful giving an important task to, an intern unless they were well coached on how to do it. So I'm not implying that was what it's going to be, but a lot of times people say intern, they just say, hey, low paid individual, go do this thing. If it's important, make sure they're well coached.
Well, and that even goes back to the transparency of things like Glassdoor and G2 Crowd and all of that. And I think it's a situation where you got to be real smart about that. Intern also gives me pause because a lot of people equate that to free labor. And like oftentimes it ends up based on what KD was, what KD was saying, it's a hell of a lot more work to do with that because the time management skills maybe aren't there, or it's a distraction or whatever it might be. Man, we covered a whole hell of a lot. That was like rapid fire, go, go, go. KD, before we wrap, any closing thoughts on kind of what a piece of advice maybe for our audience as they think about what the future of sales could look like, or a thought to leave everybody with?
So the thought I want to leave everybody with is remembering that you're selling to people. And if you pay attention to how people are behaving, that's what you want to understand. And you can really look internally to yourself and go, how do I make buying decisions? Where do I like to get information from? How do I like to interact with the salesperson? How do I like to be paid? And understanding that as a person, are we building things towards that direction, right? So Jeff Bezos did an interview, I think this was almost 10 years ago now, and it's still something that I think about often, is they were asking him then, like, how does Amazon innovate so much? How do you stay ahead of the game? How do you make sure that you're really like kind of predicting the future? And his answer, it's just phenomenal. It's been slept on for so long. He said, well, the thing is, we don't spend that much time thinking about what will change. We focus on what won't change. And that's what we double down. Are consumers ever going to want to pay more for their product? No. Are consumers ever going to want slower shipping? No. Are consumers ever going to want to buy untrusted products? No. Are consumers ever going to want fewer options? Maybe, right? And you look at what isn't going to change and double down there. And so just remember, you're selling to people. Study how buyers act, study how you act and make decisions, because that's where sales is going to have to go. It's how we are acting now. But learn who the next round of buyers is going to be, because the buyers are changing, right? Like we didn't ask it today on whether AI will replace salespeople. Whether it fully replaces or not, we'll see. But guess what, y'all? AI is also going to help replace buyers.
It's going to change a lot.
If your buyers are changing, so are we. And again, we don't get to make that call. So study people, understand what isn't going to change about people, and make sure that you're building go-to-market plans accordingly. Because if you know damn well you would want a free trial, guess what? So would your buyer.
Well, let's leave it with that, KD. I'm so glad that we had a chance to have you on. I can't wait to have you on again, dude. This was phenomenal. Lots of good questions still in there. Really appreciate your time. I know how incredibly busy you are, so thank you for sharing your perspective here today. For folks that want to tune in for our next session, we've got something coming up this afternoon that actually follows on nicely with what Katie was saying about the evolution of sales. We're going to be talking about the rise of the technical sales team, the sales engineering function, all that with Tanner Lacey, co-founder at Spiff. But Katie, on behalf of all the folks in the MSP community who joined in live, folks watching us on YouTube in the future, the team behind the scenes, this was awesome. Really, really thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. Stay safe and stay awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Take it easy. Talk soon.
Later.